Well, I'm excited. I'm excited about being here today too. Um, I'm going to be sharing stuff that over the last few years we have put together in a project that I was working on. I'm going to try to stay hydrated because I am recovering from the flu and I've had a big cough. So if I sound a little rough, it's because of that. But let me share my screen. And so there we go. So what Wendy asked me to talk about today was object-based learning leading to civic engagement. And so as we, well, wait a minute, there we go. So basically what this is an opportunity to use historic objects and artwork and artifacts to connect to civic engagement. And that's a big part of a project that I worked on for a number of years. And so give you a little bit of background information. I was in the right place at the right time to develop a partnership with the U.S. Department of State's Diplomatic Reception Rooms, which is a museum that partners with a number of other entities like the Smithsonian, Library of Congress, and a number of other museums. But because that's actually where the diplomacy of the United States takes place, they can't really share their rooms. So they were looking for an opportunity to develop a way to get their collection and some educational resources out to teachers. And I just happened to be in the right place at the right time and offered some suggestions. And the next thing I knew, I was in a partnership with them. We gradually pulled in some other state entities and nationally recognized institutions. For instance, the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art was one of our partners. The Clinton Presidential Library was another one of our partners. We had some state partners, our Department of Arkansas Heritage, and a number of other museums. And basically what we started to develop was a model for training teachers how to take historic objects and artwork and artifacts and turn those into lessons connected to their curriculum, but gradually leading to teacher-facilitated, student-led civic engagement projects. So that's the background of where I'm coming from with this project. And so a lot of the resources that I'm going to share with you today have come out of the work that we've done. So the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that every object has a story that it can tell that we can relate to. And so, whoops. And so I'd like to share an object with you today. This is my grandmother. Her name is Grace, or was Grace. And she was my mother's mother, and there were a lot of things that I learned from her, but one of those things was an object that has gone down in the family from my grandmother, actually from her grandmother. Would anybody like to guess what they think this might be, this object? You can pop it in the chat or just unmute, whichever way you want to do it. Yes, Brandy's right. It is a butter press. Now, kids will make a lot of other guesses, cookie cutters, just a stamp of some kind. And when we look at it closely, we see it's made out of wood, and you can't tell from the picture, but one of the things that's really interesting to me is that even though it's two separate pieces, I can't tell, and I've looked in a whole lot of different ways, I can't tell how the two pieces were put together. But this particular butter mold, there are a lot of stories around it. My mother talks about when she was a little girl, she spent summers at her grandparents' farm, and it was on the Buffalo River. And one of her tasks was the milk that had come from the cow that morning would get put into a butter churn, and it would be her job to churn that butter. And then once it was ready, then it would be poured into this mold and taken down into the cellar where it was cool, and it would be kept there. And they liked to make it a little fancy so that it was nice to look at. So that's the story my mother tells. Now, my grandmother used this butter mold. My grandparents lived along the railroad tracks, and during the 30s, we know the Great Depression was going on then, and it was very common for men to jump off the train at my grandparents' house, and they would knock on the back door and ask for food in exchange for work. So even later on, when I was a child, I could still see this tablet that my grandmother kept by the back door that had a list of chores. So that always needed to be done. And so she would make food every day, knowing that at least a few men would show up and need a job in exchange for food. And she that was just one of those things. And so when I talk about the butter mold, I use it as an example to share about that particular story. Now, there are some other things. When I started doing research on the Great Depression and men hopping off, that's when I found out that this is when the hobo whole thing started. And another thing that I found in the research was that they had a whole pictographic language that they would share. So then when they went to communities, they would leave these pictographs that may say, a doctor will, a doctor will be helpful to you here, or this lady is kind and will give you food, or stay away from these people because they will run you off. So that, to me, that's a whole lot of different types of questions and topics that we can get kids to start to think about. And as a school librarian, I'm always looking for how can I engage students in inquiry, and having them try to find the answers to these questions is a way to do that. And by letting them choose the kind of questions that they want to find the answers for, I'm also providing more motivation and engagement for those students. So once I've done this and we've done that research, then the next step is to work with students and talk about what issues came out of this object and its story. So you can pop it into the chat or you can unmute, but what are some issues that came out of this particular story? Think about what you know about the Great Depression, what you know about how we, our relationship with food. Times were very difficult and food was scarce. So we're talking about food scarcity, people being hungry, not having work. One of the things that I mentioned was hobos, men traveling on the train. So that idea of being homeless. So those are all issues. Now, are those issues that we can relate to today? I hear in the news every day about how huge our homeless population is getting. And just yesterday, I heard a story about the fact that our homeless population is aging, when the average age used to be in the 30s. Now they're in their 50s. And so, so those issues, that's where I want to get my kids to after I've talked about this object, is to explore those issues and start to relate them to today. And so based on the work that I've done before, when we talk about that idea of leading students to discuss the issues that come out of this object, and then taking those issues, relating them to today, and then having our students give them an opportunity to think about, so how can they, as individuals or as a group, impact positively that particular issue. And so these are just some examples of, if we take food insecurity that came out of that original object of the butter mold, then these actions: participating in a soup kitchen, contributing to a food bank, creating a community garden, those are all actions that they can take that can positively impact their community, but it arises out of that issue of food insecurity. So in analyzing those objects, we really want our kids to think about them. So it's not just important to just show it and have them kind of see if they can figure out what it is, but you really want them to investigate it. And I'm not sure if you've used the National Archives worksheets, analysis worksheets, but I really like those. We've also used Library of Congress, Smithsonian. They all have something similar to this, but I really like these because the way they're laid out. Now, when you look at the novice one, which I would use with elementary students, there's a lot of pictures there to help them think through it. But looking at those questions where they really examine that object closely, and then as they start to really think about the object and its use, then you can start to see that they try to make sense of it, not only what it was used for, but what does it tell us about the people that used it, the time period that it was used. And so this novice one, and I would use this one even with high school students, if I'm just now starting to get them into that habit of analyzing those objects. And then gradually you can shift them away to this one that's a little more complex in terms of the kinds of questions that it asks, and it spends more time trying to get them to think about what how it was used, to make sense of it. So I really like these, and you're going to have access in the Google folder to this slide presentation. So you'll see a link there that will actually take you to all of those. And they don't have them just for objects. They have them for photographs, newspaper articles, any kind of an artifact that you can think of. They have an analysis sheet for that. So here's another strategy that you can use that takes students in a little bit different direction. So once you've examined the object, and in this case, we're looking at a particular mask, then you want to kind of expand that and think about these three questions, because this is what can help your students think about those issues and then lead them to that idea of taking some kind of positive action. So you want to ask, so why might this particular object, topic, or question matter to me? How does it personally relate to me? And then how might it relate to the people around me. And when we start talking about how we can positively impact our community, that's when we really want to start asking those questions. Why would it even matter to the people around me? And then, and we know that students also have a tendency to think globally. So not only can I influence my my local community, but how can I make it matter to the world? So here's a strategy that we put together that can help you look at an issue and then walk students through actually developing a civic engagement project. So first of all, it starts with that connecting that theme from history to today. So we started with that butter mold, and then that took us to the Great Depression. But then after we started talking about it, we could see parallels to things that are happening today in our communities. And so once you've done that, then brainstorm an issue. And what I've found with most objects is there's always more than one issue. And so giving students a chance to not only brainstorm a number of issues, but to actually then have them select one that they can then talk about, well, how can we as a small group or I as an individual, how can I turn this into a project which can have a positive impact on my community? So that next step after you've selected the issue is to think about what resources you have available to you, who can be community partners, how are you going to reach out, and then actually identify solutions, and then create that civic engagement plan, and then put it into action. And then once you put it into action, how can you reflect on it and make it better? Excuse me. So I do want to mention, when I was at the high school, one of the things that we did, we were fortunate enough to have an alumni who had actually formed a foundation who went into small villages in Africa. And this foundation, they would go into this small village and they would identify the problems that this village had. So it might be good water. Maybe they had to walk miles to get water, or it might be that they really needed a school, or a number of other problems that they might have. Maybe they had no electricity and they could use it. So this young woman who created this foundation would come into our classes, and these were seniors, and would present information about the village that they had chosen to work with that year. And after she presented, then our students would actually look at those issues and would follow a very similar process where they identified solutions and presented those. We would bring in some people to be judges, and they would present their project, their solutions to help this particular village. And then the judges would determine, they would narrow it down to the best 2 to 3 projects. And then those students actually went to the board of the foundation and presented their projects. And then the board sometimes chose all 3 projects, but that would be how they decided to work, to use those projects to impact that village. Well, you can imagine that that kind of relevance for our students really made them push out, and also gave them a real sense of being able to have a positive impact. And I really honestly believe that for the rest of their lives, having had that success, they know that they can have an impact. So So that's just one example, but we used this a number of years with our teachers that we trained and found this to be a very impactful process and really worked well in helping our students to choose projects that they could do. So another set of questions that you can ask your students as they start thinking about how they can take action is to really think about those circles of influence that they can have. So if I'm trying to contribute, how can I contribute to my inner circle? This may be my school, my group of friends. How can I contribute positively to that inner circle? But then moving beyond that to my local community, and then can I have an impact beyond my community? So having these kinds of questions that you can ask to help your students think about how they can have a positive impact, I think is really important. And if you provide them with information and opportunities for them to explore just what are the issues within my community and how can I contribute positively to solving problems within my community. So I think these are three really important questions to help your students think through that. And so really, can students make a difference? Yes, they can. Let me give you a few examples. This particular group created an outdoor classroom at their school. So they formed, did a little bit of landscaping. They painted these rocks that had positive messages on them. And then they created a space where teachers could take their students outside and explore the outdoors, look at plants, they really developed a nice garden. They, as part of that, I don't have a picture of that here, but you can see the plans that they had for creating this space that could be used. And in addition to partly being a playground, they also put in a community garden, so students could go out there and start to develop that relationship with the land. This particular group of students, these were young middle school students. Their project, they determined, or they discovered that they had a veteran who had died, but he did not have a tombstone. And so they actually decided that he needed to be honored with a tombstone. So they put together a project where they raised funds to get this tombstone made. But in the process of that, they started to realize that they had a lot of other veterans in their community. So that led to a proclamation by the mayor. They organized a parade in honor of all the veterans in their town. And they actually asked their state legislator to declare a certain day in the honor of this particular veteran. And so again, they not only did something in their community, but they reached out to their state to get that recognition, and having that interaction with state legislators was a really great experience for them. And again, this is a group of high school students who went to their town council and got some land set aside and created a community garden. And they made a commitment that even after they graduated from high school, they would continue to contribute to the upkeep of this community garden. And they started training the kids that were coming behind them to also take care of this community garden. So it is something that will continue. And the food that they grew in this community garden went to the school, and it was used as part of the lunch program. So gave kind of a new meaning to farm to table for these kids. These students identified that there were a number of people in their community that were not able to go to the polls and vote because they had transportation issues. They had to work and couldn't get there. So they worked with the local election officials and other people, and they organized vans that would go and pick up people so they could come to vote. They set up a process in their polling places so that people could move quickly through, excuse me, and be able to vote. And you can see this young man is wearing a red coat, and they all had these red jackets that they wore, and they called themselves the Redcoats. I don't know why they called themselves the Redcoats, but that's how you identified them. So those are just a few of the examples of after we trained teachers how to work with these objects and introduce them to a number of strategies for helping students look at these objects and think about issues. We also started thinking about, where do museums fit within this? Because many of our partners were museums. So first of all, the shorter lady in that picture is Kathleen Pate. She's the education, excuse me, the education director at the Clinton Presidential Library. And this is what she says came out of the work that we did, which was that she was able to build a lot of relationships with teachers that expanded beyond just the training that we did. Excuse me. This other photograph is the grounds at the Presidential Library, and this is one of the exhibits. It's an outdoor exhibit. The Clinton Presidential Library was granted one of the seedlings from the Anne Frank tree. And so what you see in those panels there are quotes not only from Anne Frank, but Arkansas is known for the Little Rock Nine, which was school integration. So we have a quote from one of the Little Rock Nine people there. We also had two Japanese American incarceration camps in Arkansas. And so we have a quote from George Takei, who was incarcerated there when he was a young child. And we also, this is one of the paths of the Trail of Tears. So we have a quote from one of the Native leaders there. And so we use this as an opportunity to talk about how these particular experiences have what they have in common, but also gives us an opportunity to talk about the lessons that we can learn from our history. And so this is one of the ways that students come and experience that. And it's a really great opportunity for students to get a firsthand feel for some of those experiences. And that's what a museum can do for us. They have a lot of those objects that we're talking about that we want kids to get those stories from. In this particular, here, we're still in front of the Anne Frank tree, but what these kids did was they signed a pledge card to work for peace. So that was one of those things that they did as a result of what they saw at the Clinton Presidential Library. Whoops, let me go back. So I've also included in here, one of the things that I've learned over the years is that there are two kinds of field trips. One, the kids get off the bus and the teacher says, I'll see you in a couple of hours. And the kids just go crazy. The other kind of field trip is an experience where kids actually have an opportunity to really see objects that tell stories about our history and help us learn from that. And so that's the kind of field trip that I want students to take. So I have developed in here, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it, but I have developed in here and you're going to find that in the Google folder. It is a field trip planning guide. And it actually has 2 pages, but this planning guide gives you not only an opportunity to really think about the resources of the museum and what's going to best meet your educational need, but also then planning the logistics of that field trip. And I can tell you that I have taken 750 kids to a Prairie Grove Battlefield, which was a Confederate, which was, a big Confederate battle. And but they also have a number of other things. And so they have a one-room schoolhouse there. They have a cabin where they have living history actors who will do things for us, and battlefield recreators. And so we took our kids, we divided them into their classes. They had a math lesson in the one-room schoolhouse with slates. They had a lesson on how people were able to cook over an open fire in the one log cabin, and they learned how to make bread. They saw demonstrations. We had them very much structured throughout the whole day. And all during that time, they had questions that they had to answer based on the experiences they had. And then we followed up when we got back with some additional activities. That's how you make a field trip to be a real learning experience. And so that guide that I have for you is one that has come about over years of experience in things that I think will help you as you plan one. And I can tell you that I always spent one day at the museum before I went, working with the education person to plan all this out, because you can't just show up and make it happen. So just a few words to the wise on that. And so extending that field experience, really thinking about what they've seen there is to, it is one thing to talk about what did they discover in this local history when they went to the museum? What were things that they could connect to? What did it tell them about the history of their community? And then connecting that to today's community, and finally then taking action so that you have a student-led civic engagement. One of the things that hasn't happened yet, but I keep dreaming about it, there's a little museum in Northwest Arkansas that's a Victorian house, but a doctor lived there. And it's been turned into a museum with all of his medical devices and everything of what life was like for a doctor in the mid 1800s. And this little museum is just a real treasure. But They don't have a website. They haven't digitized any of their collection. All they can do, because it's all volunteers, all they can do is a class of kids show up and they can talk about it. But think about if I had a group of students and we went to this museum and we talked with the people who run it and we said, what can we do to get your collection out to the public? How could we develop resources that would let students who couldn't come to your space experience what you have to share? And so I keep thinking, students in a class that are a tech class could do 3D digitization of the collection, and they could work with the volunteers there to develop the story that goes with that object, and then post that on a website so that I could bring a class of students to that museum without ever leaving our classroom. So I have this dream that someday I'll find a group of students who will do that. But I keep thinking there's a lot of opportunities like that for students to not just take advantage of what's there to see, but how could they give back to that museum and spread the word? So here are some other possible projects based on working with museums. If you have not ever used StoryCorps app, they have a whole list of different kinds of interviews for different types of people that you might interview. So you already have the questions that students could ask. So creating that oral history by doing interviews, doing audio tours. There was a group of students who at Central High School, and remember that's where Little Rock 9 was, they actually developed an audio tour of Elizabeth Eckford's walk that first day when she was by herself. It's very powerful, but being able to listen to that tour and be taken through that story is really powerful. So, and developing podcasts about what they've seen at museums, develop a social media campaign. All of these are different kinds of very authentic assessments that teachers could use to show student work, but also has an impact on museums, on their communities. So these are just a few of the many that people could do. We've had students that painted murals on the sides of buildings that express something that they learned about the history of their community. We've had them recreate journals and diaries based on the research that they did of characters from past times. So all of those things are ones they could do. I'd also like to recommend that you take a look at the Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations. There's 16 of them, I think. And any one of those would be ones that students could adapt and look at their local community to see how they can impact making their community more sustainable using those same goals. Okay, just a few resources. First of all, I would really like to recommend, if you are not familiar with Harvard Project Zero, you need to know about that. Project Zero, let's see, let me go back. I've already got it up there. Project Zero has a thinking routine toolbox, and it looks at a number of different ways. You can see core thinking routines, introducing and exploring ideas, digging deeper into them, being able to organize them, looking at different perspectives, investigating objects and systems. You have exploring art and images. All of these are thinking routines that that you have, and I incorporated a couple of them in my presentation today. But you'll also know See, Think, Wonder is one that a lot of people have used. I think you've been introduced to it. So again, it's there as well. But all of these different thinking routines, when you look at them, you click on that, it takes you to a page where, and my computer's being slow in opening that up, but it gives you the actual resource, which are the instructions for how to do that, and how you can walk students through that thinking routine. I love these. I have, once I found them, I use them often because critical thinking is something that we want our students to be able to do, and these are strategies that I can use. I just really love them. Another resource that I've come across lately is called History Collab, and History Collab is just a project that focuses on helping students be civically engaged. And they've got a number of partners. They have some programs they have in their projects. Some of them that they're looking at are, let's see if I can get to it. They're working with youth podcasts, what they call the Untext book. They have activating museums with the power of play. They have community implementation of educating for American democracy. They've developed a number of, they're going with place-based project learning. So there's a number of projects that they're working on that you can tap into. And so just very quickly, it's just something that has captured my interest lately, and so I'm gonna just let you know about it. Finally, just some examples. I don't know if you are familiar with this book, but this is a book that was put together by a couple of teachers at Parkland, and they're student journalists who, when the Parkland shooting happened, this was about their reactions, and they really did take a lot of action and really try to make an influence. And this is just a book that documents what they did and how they did it. It's very powerful, and I would share this with students. This Makers with a Cause. Of course, there are a lot of school libraries that have and schools that have maker spaces. What I find interesting about this one is that part of what they do, everything that they make is a result of surveying their community and seeing what their needs are. So they looked around and they talked to the people at the animal shelter and found out that they needed leashes for dogs. And so they made leashes. And so I just really like that way of promoting a community service at the same time that we're teaching kids other skills. I don't know if you're familiar with this series. I'd use this a lot with upper elementary. My finger, I have a trigger finger on my mouse pad. This Citizen Kid, there are a lot of books there, and a lot of it has to do with looking at our world, seeing what problems are and how we can contribute positively to solutions. And this particular one is about the ocean, and each page just has a different problem and how some people have gone about trying to solve that problem. So I really like these Citizen Kid ones. And then this is a great one, if you're going to a march. And so this is really helping kids learn how to organize a march. And that's one of the privileges that we have as a democratic society, is that we have the right to peacefully assemble and to express our opinions. And so I really like this little book. And those are just an example. There are thousands of other books out there. If we go to the Google folder, this I talked about that 7 steps to leading to a civic engagement project. This is an expansion of that, so it really goes into a lot of detail. I've always liked this 10 questions for change makers teaching guide because it really helps kids think about how they can make change and how they can impact their community. And so it's just those 10 questions that you can lead them through thinking about that. This is a white paper on what the core competencies in civic engagement are. And I just think it's really helpful for you to think about what skills do we need to help our students develop and how can we encourage them to be civically engaged. This civic engagement plan is actually a document to help you think through the process of developing a student engagement plan. So it helps you with just thinking through the logistics of it. And again, I encourage you, one of the things that we've found to be really helpful is to try to remember that you are helping students facilitate this. So you need to let them take the lead. And as teachers, it's really hard for us to let go of the control of that. But what you'll find, you might come up with an idea and kids are going to take it in a totally different direction. But because they're so engaged in the process and so motivated, it turns out to be much better than anything you could have imagined yourself. There's the field trip planning guide. There are my presentation slides. This is 3 proven practices for civic engagement resources. It's just a really nice list of resources that you might find useful. This and this right here is the guidebook that goes along with that. And I found it to be very useful in helping me think through things. And then here is another one of those strategies, the 3 whys, which I alluded to earlier. If I can make it come up. Well, I'm not going to. You can look at it. And we are running out of time. Now, I asked Wendy if she wanted me to give you an assignment. And so it is strictly, it's not a requirement, but I do have an assignment that I hope you will take some time and actually do. And basically all I'm asking you to do is to choose an object, and I'll show you those in the folder in a minute, to choose an object from the Google folder and design a lesson around it, highlighting that object. But the idea is that you're going to ask your students, after you've focused on that object, you're going to ask your students to identify those issues that they can then make relevant to today. And then let them, divide them into small groups, let them work individually, however, but once they've chosen that issue and done a little bit of investigation on it, then what's a solution that they can propose that would positively impact that issue? And I've provided you with a lesson plan template to make that easier for you. And that's right here. It's just a very simple one. You don't have to use it, but I've got it in there for you to think about. To me, the important part of this assignment is to reflect on what you've learned from doing this lesson and what your students have learned. One of the things that I think you'll find is that your students become very engaged in this process. They find it very interesting and want to pursue it. Now, in the Google folder, when you open it up, you'll see another folder that says objects. And I have provided you with a pretty good assortment of different types of artwork, paintings, objects, artifacts. And with each one, you're going to find a sheet that gives a description and some background information so that you not only have the item itself, but some background information to help you build that lesson. So that's in the Google folder. That's your assignment if you choose to accept it. And again, here's the link to the Google folder, which I think I saw Wendy said that it had been put in the Wakelet. This is my contact information, and we have a few minutes left. If you have some questions, I'm happy to answer them. And I know I kind of rushed through this. Some of this is stuff that I would have spent a whole day in training teachers with. So you're just getting a little bit of taste of it. Do I need to leave this up, or should I go ahead and stop sharing?
And we will put your contact information too. We'll put that in the Wakelet. I do want to give just a really quick shout out when Cassandra said, what about an assignment? And I said, we can provide a stipend. So anyone, should you choose to accept the assignment, we will pay you $50. We'll put that on the invoice too. So we really do think there's lots of value. Here's why. We know that you all have a million things on your to-do list, but part of this is letting you dive into those Project Zero thinking strategies. If you're like me, you're like, oh, again, I'll get to that. That's on my to-do list. I'll really try to dive into that. But we really know if you're like me and you have really taken some time to look at those, they are of significant value. That's something that I know I said, bookmark this, use this, but if you really do take some time to delve into that, you will love them. That will be something that you go to and you use frequently. So adding that little carrot of, hey, we'll pay you $50 if you really do invest in this. That's how much we know it will change your instructional practices. We do find merit to that. We do find value to that. So I'm going to really quickly give you an upload link. We'll put that in the Wakelet as well. Jamie probably has already done that because she's incredible. But if you want to participate in the lesson plans, here's the upload link where you can upload your lesson plans. You can use that wonderful lesson plan template that Cassandra's given you. Or if you say, hey, this is a really great lesson, I'm going to turn it in and submit it on the forms that our district requires. You can use your district form as well.
Sure.
But just know that really that's what we're wanting you to do is really look at those objects, dive into those Project Zero thinking strategies, and take some time just walking through those steps that Cassandra's laid out for you.
And one thing I'll mention is that over time, what our teachers started to realize was that they could do these lessons and connect them to their standards and their curriculum. We weren't asking them to do anything extra. We were asking them to think about their curriculum in a little bit different way. And so that's what how I encourage you to think about this is it's not something extra. It's just a different way to do what you're already doing.
Yeah, that's a perfect point. And like you said, you'll see those Project Zero thinking strategies. Like that would be a great way to do a bell ringer. That'll be a great way to do a thinking strategy or an exit slip. So you'll start to see how those kind of evolve in like what Cassandra said, what you're already doing. And it may be a new way to do it. Some of you all were asking about engagement strategies, inquiry. So this is a perfect tie into what is already on your professional learning paths and plans. Fantastic. How many of you were like me and you're like, I can't believe we're getting all this. I can't believe we're getting all these resources. There were things on there I didn't know about the History Collab. So I'm very excited to dive into that myself. I'm super eager. Jamie shared the Wakelet. Fantastic. Does anyone have any questions for Cassandra? I know plethora of resources were shared. I will say, this is kind of my wrap it all up. You all know how we started with tell a story. And there were so many fantastic things that you shared that just wraps all of that up. And I keep thinking this is my, how my brain kind of works. There were so many elements to that tell a story that you started with. And each one of us, our communities are all different, but that is the one thing I think that it kind of keeps coming back to in my mind is, we're all either social studies educators, history educators, ELA, special education, regardless of what content, either librarians, every one of us have a story to tell. Our communities have a story to tell. And if we can get all of us have that unique bond of how do we make it authentic? How do we make it engaging for our students? Let them tell the story. If you can bring your community in, I know like in my community, that's the one way in our small community, our community wants to be involved with the school. If I can go to someone who is not digitized and I can say, let my students come in and share your story, tell your story versus a worksheet, versus a worksheet where I'm saying, learn this about this character. If they're going into a community and they're telling that story of history, what a fantastic, authentic experience for my students. So fantastic. I absolutely, this is one of those, again, why I was so excited. And here is the evaluation. I'll go ahead and put that in the chat. No one has missed it. I was just, again, reminiscing on how fantastic this session was. If you all have any questions, please feel free to stay on. Otherwise, we will have a follow-up session. Cassandra, I do not have that date. You probably have it right offhand.
No, I don't.
Okay, good. All right, we will get with you on the next date that Cassandra is with us. I will also put a due date on your. We just kind of are looking for you to try this out before the next time that we meet back with Cassandra. Absolutely fantastic session as I knew it would be. So the hype was real. Thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
We're excited to try these out. I am looking for, here's what I'm looking for. You all know this is coming. I am looking for things that you're trying in your classroom, whether it be Project Zero, thinking strategies, whether it be History Collab, whether it is a civic action, like you're actually putting some feet to these civic action projects with your students in your classroom. So lots of great, she gave us the charge today. Let's see how we're going to implement it with our students. So fantastic. You all have a wonderful Tuesday, Wednesday. So that's all I got. Thank you all so much.